Expo stage, we have our next speaker, Robyn. Robyn is a baker based in Orangeville, Ontario. She's born and raised in Nova Scotia. She's come from several generations of award-winning bakers. But in 2016, unfortunately, she's diagnosed with celiac, so she can't no longer enjoy her family's prized recipes. But a good thing, she's a good baker, an avid baker herself. She set out on a mission to create all those recipes gluten-free without compromising on the taste or quality. In 2020, she launched her company, Robyn's Gluten-free Baking Courses, offering online courses to teach people how to bake gluten-free. She also has a YouTube channel, so definitely check her out. It's Robyn's Gluten-free Living that offers fun, informational, and relatable videos about celiac disease and living gluten-free. Let's welcome Robyn Harrison.
Hello. It works. All right. The picture I'm about to show you might be disturbing. Prepare yourselves. This is a photo I took on August 16th, 2016, about a week after my celiac disease diagnosis. I had spent the week researching the best gluten-free bread to buy and finally decided to take the $9 plunge so I could enjoy some toast. As you can see, the loaf crumbled into a million little pieces in my toaster, or well, I guess 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pieces. I can still remember the disappointment that I had wasted my money and the fear that this is what my new normal would be. Unfortunately, it didn't get easier. Between crying after my first restaurant meal, or to be more accurate, during my first restaurant meal, cookies that tasted like sawdust, and lumps of hard bread, the transition to gluten-free was rough. Not only was I dissatisfied with the food choices, but going gluten-free was hard on my wallet. It took me a couple of years, but I finally discovered a new way of baking gluten-free that completely changed my life and help me save money at the same time. Which is why today we're going to talk about how to save money and bake better. We'll look at the cost of being gluten-free, the challenges of all-purpose blends, mixes, blogs, and cookbooks, what's holding your baking back, and how to get started baking easy, affordable, and delicious gluten-free baked goods at home. But before we get into that, let me give you a quick introduction in case you're wondering who this random lady is standing before you sharing graphic bread images. I'm Robyn. I'm the creator of Robyn's Gluten-free Baking Courses, where I teach bakers from all over the world how to bake the most delicious and affordable gluten-free baked goods at home. Fun fact, I teach bakers on every continent except Antarctica. So if you know anyone, let me know. You can also find me on YouTube as Robyn's Gluten-free Living. I make videos about living with celiac disease that are informative and entertaining, or at least I try. Oh, and I'm not sure if you saw this going around on the interwebs, but I also started that petition to bring gluten-free Kraft dinner to Canada. And Kraft said that they would do it at 25,000 signatures, and we only need 10,000 more. So if you get bored during my presentation, please feel free to pull out your phone and go to change.org and go sign that petition, because I want my Kraft dinner. All right, if you have any questions about baking or anything else after the presentation, my booth is just over there at 204, so please stop by and ask any questions, or sign up for a course, or just say hi. All right, back on track. We're going to first look at the cost of being gluten-free. Something you don't think about when you first get prescribed a gluten-free diet is the cost. My initial reaction went something like, I'm sorry, I have to give up all the foods I love and pay more money? Did you know that, on average, gluten-free products are 242% more expensive than regular products? That was a study done in 2008. There's also one from 2021 that found that gluten-free products were anywhere from 46 to 443% more expensive and less nutritious. After the first several months on a gluten-free diet, my credit card was screaming. In Canada, if you're diagnosed with celiac disease, you can claim those extra costs as a health expense. As such, I know exactly how much I've spent on gluten-free products the first few years after my diagnosis. And now keep in mind that this is the difference in cost between the gluten-free product and the regular product, or as I like to call it, the gluten-free tax. So in 2017, my first full year of eating gluten-free, I spent an extra whopping $642. $642. $642 is like 3 months of groceries. $642 is like 3 round-trip flights from Vancouver to Toronto. $642 could have bought me 2 pairs of these killer Flu-Vog boots. On top of the extra cost, I wasn't even really enjoying the products I was spending my hard-earned money on, especially the bread. Ooh. Whenever I had toast for breakfast, I was dreaming of the texture of regular bread. I was tired of the tiny, tiny slices and my sandwiches falling apart. I decided enough was enough. I would find a way to reduce my spending and be able to enjoy food again. The answer was gluten-free home baking. Unfortunately, though, the transition to good gluten-free home baking was tricky. Now, if you've dabbled with gluten-free baking, I'm sure you'll be able to relate to at least some, if not all, of my challenging experiences with all-purpose blends, mixes, blogs, and cookbooks. I started my gluten-free baking journey with all-purpose blends. This seemed like a great starting point as I simply swapped it out one for one in my old regular recipes. Turns out it was not as simple as I had thought. It was really hit or miss. I couldn't predict what was going to be okay and what was going to be a disaster. I can still remember bringing a certain gluten-free all-purpose blend to a cookie decorating party so that I would be able to participate. The cookies turned out so dry and crumbly that we literally just composted them after we were done decorating them. I was so confused, though, because the muffins that I had made with that same mix were totally fine. I continued to try out lots of different blends over the years, both the more affordable ones in the grocery store and the specialty ones that you can only order online. Overall, my baking was unpredictable. Frustrated with the blends, I tried a couple of different baking mixes, like a gluten-free pizza crust mix or a cake mix. While the quality was a little bit more consistent, I still came across a couple of issues. First, I didn't know how to use the mix. They came with very vague instructions. So one time I tried a pizza mix, but I didn't know if I should knead it, roll it, or spread it out with a spatula. If you don't prepare it correctly, you could ruin it. Next, I couldn't control the ingredient levels. Some of the muffin mixes that I found were mostly sugar and cornstarch. Not bad every once in a while as a treat, but I wanted something a little bit more nutritious if I was going to be eating it every day. And mixes were expensive. Most mixes that I've seen range from $6 to $10 and are usually just for one batch or one meal. This was a huge financial burden for me and not something that I was able to maintain long term. One time I saw a lemon loaf mix that looked good until I noticed it was $25 and it made one loaf. So, mixes were out. I needed a longer term solution. I tried so many recipes on online blogs, only to find that so many of them required very specific gluten-free blends that I didn't have, couldn't find locally, and sometimes couldn't even order online. That's when I decided to try good old trusty cookbooks. I found a couple at my local used bookstore and that I thought looked pretty good. The pattern that I saw with cookbooks is that each one required you to buy all of the individual ingredients, like rice flour and potato starch. Then it tells you to create your own all-purpose blend to use for the recipes. Some of the books had a couple all-purpose blends, like a basic one and a whole grain one. Plus, these recipes often asked you to combine those blends with the individual ingredients as well. A few weeks later, my cupboards were overflowing with all these bags of individual flours, plus massive jars of different all-purpose blends that were only for specific recipes. Worse yet, sometimes it took all that time to mix together the flour and try the recipe, and I didn't even like it. So now I had this giant tub of flour blend that I wasn't going to use again. So between inconsistent results from all-purpose blends, baking mixes that were breaking the bank, and cookbooks that required me to do a lot of work without the results I was looking for, I decided to try something different. Ta-da! I ditched the idea of all-purpose blends. Now, I did this for 3 main reasons. First, blends give inconsistent results, they're more expensive, and you're working against the ingredients. If you've been baking at home and not getting the results you're hoping for, this might be what is holding your baking back. So first, why do blends give inconsistent results? It's all about the ingredients that they're made of. A regular all-purpose flour is just bleached wheat flour. A gluten-free all-purpose flour typically consists of a mix of grains and starches. But every gluten-free blend is different. Some have higher amounts of starch, some are made with bean flours, some have a binder like xanthan gum, and some don't. This means you might find a blend that's perfect for cookies, but makes your bread a tiny solid lump. Let's take a closer look at 2 popular blends. All-purpose baking flour and gluten-free 1-to-1 flour. Both of these are by Bob's Red Mill. So the base of the all-purpose blend on your left is chickpea flour or garbanzo bean flour. And the base of the 1-to-1 flour is sweet rice flour made from sticky rice. Now, imagine that you have a handful of each of these bases. In one hand, chickpeas, the other, sticky rice. Sticky rice is like what you would use for sushi. When you think of it like that, it seems obvious that chickpeas and sticky rice have completely different properties. This is why blends are not interchangeable and give you inconsistent results. You wouldn't use sticky rice for hummus, and you wouldn't wrap your sushi in chickpeas. Sweet rice flour has high amounts of starch, giving it excellent binding properties. On the other hand, chickpea flour is high in fiber and protein and has a more distinct taste. There are, however, lots of blends out there that have very similar ingredients. Here are a few examples. The President's Choice flour, Cup for Cup, Better Batter, King Arthur, Gluten-free Jules, Robyn Hood. Some of these might look familiar to you. So most of these blends include some combination of rice flour, tapioca starch, cornstarch, and potato starch. So similar ingredients, but the problem is that typically these ingredients aren't used in the same amounts. One might be mostly made of tapioca starch, the other mostly made up of rice flour. We know that baking is a science, and even small amounts of certain ingredients can completely change how your baking turns out. Since these flours and starches have completely different properties, if you just swap them out, you're going to get inconsistent results. I tend to get frustrated with gluten-free recipes that just call for 1 cup of gluten-free flour for this reason. Because the blends are so different, you're going to get a different result every time. All right, on to my second reason why I stopped using blends. They're more expensive than buying the individual ingredients. I had always suspected that gluten-free flour blends were expensive, but I never realized how much more I was spending until I did the math. So let's get a little nitty-gritty for my math nerds out there. So the prices for some of the most popular gluten-free blends out there ranged from 87 cents per 100 grams all the way up to $2.42 per 100 grams, with the average price of them being $1.42 per 100 grams. And just a heads up, I pulled these prices from searching online, which means that a lot of them are going to be the best price possible. If you've been buying flours from like a specialty store, you might be paying even more than that. On the flip side, let's compare those prices to the cost of the individual ingredients that are used in those blends. So the prices range from 49 cents per 100 grams for white rice flour to 86 cents per 100 grams for potato starch, with the average price of these flours being 66 cents per 100 grams. So there's a little side-by-side price comparison for you. But long story short, blends are twice as expensive as using individual flours. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't like paying twice the price for someone to mix flours together for me. And if you're someone who doesn't really care too much about the cost, then maybe my third reason I stopped using blends will convince you, which is blends mean you're working against the ingredients. As I explained earlier, gluten-free all-purpose blends use different ingredients that have different properties. For example, rice flour can be an excellent base for your gluten-free baking and is important for structure. Too much rice flour, though, can sometimes result in a gritty texture. A blend that's high in rice flour then might be perfect for your bread recipe, but makes your cookies into like biting into sand. So if you're using a blend, what are your options here? Well, for one, you can just use a completely different blend, like brand of all-purpose flour, but then you're going to need a different blend for bread, one for muffins, one for cookies, until your cupboard is overflowing with different flour blends. Or two, you can try adding different types of flours to your gluten-free blend to reduce the grittiness. But then you're going to have all these single ingredient flours plus different blends, so your cupboards are still overflowing, and adding more flour to your all-purpose blend kind of defeats the purpose of an all-purpose blend. Okay, here's another example for you. Buttermilk biscuits. Delicious. You want the perfect biscuit to be light, fluffy, and tender. I tried several all-purpose blends to make biscuits. One turned out bone dry, one was completely flat, and one tasted okay, but it was way too chewy. That's when I started playing with the individual ingredients myself. I found that when I used tapioca starch, it gave the biscuits a chewy, almost stretchy texture, and nobody wants stretchy biscuits. I looked back at all the all-purpose blends that I was using, and all of them contained tapioca starch. So if you're using a blend, the only way to fix this is to add more rice flour or cornstarch to balance the amount of tapioca. This is, again, what I call working against the ingredients. When you bake with individual flours, you can leave out any of those ingredients you don't want in the recipe. Once I found out that tapioca starch was the offender giving me stretchy biscuits, I swapped it out with a different starch, and voila, light and fluffy biscuits. Another perfect example of working against the ingredients is xanthan gum. For those of you who don't know, xanthan gum is a thickener and stabilizer that's used in most gluten-free products. Because it's so absorbent, even a small amount, like a quarter teaspoon, can make a difference in your recipe. The amount of xanthan gum you use depends on the type of baked good you're making. For example, we use a quarter teaspoon per cup of flour for cookies, a half a teaspoon per cup of flour for cakes, and 1 teaspoon per cup of flour for bread. Coming back to these blends, all of them contain xanthan gum. But how much xanthan gum is in the blends? Does it differ from blend to blend? Is it the amount that's right for cookies, for cakes, or for bread? We have no way of knowing how much is in there. If the amount ends up being more than the recommended amount for cookies, it means once again you're going to have to add more ingredients to your all-purpose blend in order to make it balance the amount of xanthan gum. This is why I prefer to work with the ingredients and not against them, tailoring each recipe with the types of flours that complement that type of baked good, and choosing the proper amount of xanthan gum for each recipe. So, here's how you save money and bake better. Stop using all-purpose blends for your baking and try using individual flours instead. Remember how I spent an extra $642 in my first year gluten-free? Well, in 2018, that number was $443. In 2019, $245. And since 2020, I don't spend enough extra on gluten-free goods to even qualify for that tax credit. So I don't keep track. I was able to reduce my gluten-free costs by over 60%. And enjoy even more delicious foods than I was able to buy. Let's take a quick look at how much money you can save by making your own bread. Now, I've seen gluten-free bread prices range anywhere from $6 all the way up to $15 per loaf. But the average loaf that I was buying was around $9. And the cost of my ingredients for my homemade loaves is just over $3. So making your bread, your own homemade bread, can save you just over $5 per loaf. If you're a loaf a week kind of person, that's over $275 saved every year. And if you're a household that goes through 2 loaves per week, that's over $550 saved per year. Now, the cherry on top of saving money, homemade gluten-free bread is so much better. Like, not just a little bit better. This is the beer, cheese, and onion loaf for my bread course. It's so good that I have to stop my gluten-eating fiance from eating the whole loaf in one sitting. And the chocolate sauce on top of the cherry on top is that my homemade bread only takes about 10 minutes of active time to make. It's done in 90 minutes. So I usually just whip up a double batch while I'm making dinner, and then I have my bread for the next 2 weeks ready. So how do you get started baking better? Now, obviously, I can't go into as much detail in this short presentation as I do in my courses, but here's a little snapshot. So we're going to learn about the ingredients, learn about the techniques, and then start playing. So first, you learn about the ingredients. Gluten-free baked goods have 3 main components: flours, starches, and binders. In my essentials course, for example, I use 3 flours, 3 starches, and 2 binders, xanthan gum and eggs. Simple. Let's quickly look at those flours. So white rice flour is a great base for your recipes. It has a fine texture, it gives some structure, and it has a neutral flavor, so it lets other flavors in your baked goods shine through. Brown rice flour, very similar properties, just has a little bit of extra fiber and protein, a little bit more of that whole grain flavor. But it's really important to note that rice flours need to be used in combination with other starches or flours in order to avoid that gritty or dry texture. On the other hand, almond flour has a light texture. It doesn't really give very much structure, but it adds a rich flavor and it helps to brown up your baked goods. So typically when you only bake with rice flour and starches, your baked goods won't brown up in the oven. For some recipes like pastry, I like to use a little bit of almond flour to help give it a beautiful browned crust. So I'll spare you from listening to me ramble about starches and binders as well, but here you can glimpse that once you understand the qualities of each individual ingredient, it takes the mystery of gluten-free baking away. So next, you learn about the techniques. Once you understand more about the role of gluten in traditional baking, the gluten-free techniques make way more sense. In regular baking, it's all about developing or not developing the gluten protein. For baked goods that are light and tender, you want the gluten protein chains to be as short as possible. That's why when you make a regular cake, you have to be careful not to overmix it, as that develops the gluten and makes the protein chains longer, giving you a dense cake. In other regular baked goods, like bread, you want the protein chains to be long for that chewy goodness, which is why you have to knead the dough. This is where gluten-free baking is totally different. Because there are no gluten protein chains to develop, there's no need to worry about overmixing a cake, and there's no need to knead the gluten-free dough. Instead, we play with flours, starches, and binders to mimic that texture. For example, we use tapioca starch, which has some elastic properties, and larger amounts of xanthan gum when making gluten-free bread to mimic those long protein chains. Now, there are a bunch of techniques that are unique to gluten-free baking because of this difference, which I cover a bit more in depth in my courses. So once you have a better understanding of gluten-free ingredients and techniques, then you can start playing. You might be wondering, how much of each ingredient am I supposed to use? Here's a good place to start. Most gluten-free flour blends follow a similar formula. About 60 to 70% or 2/3 is made up from grain flours. That's like rice flour, that kind of thing. Around 1/3 of it is starch. And then there's a little bit of a binder like xanthan gum. So if you're converting a recipe that uses 2 cups of flour, here's a good place to start. And if you're taking a picture of the screen, I'll give you a second. It's totally okay. Got it? All right. So if you're making a recipe that uses 2 cups of flour, this is a good starting point. 1 cup of white rice flour, 1/2 cup of brown rice flour, 1/4 cup of both tapioca and potato starch, as well as 1/4 to 1 teaspoon of xanthan gum. Now, there are suggested amounts of xanthan gum depending on the type of baked good that you're making. So, as I mentioned earlier, it's about 1/4 teaspoon per cup of flour for cookies, 1/2 teaspoon per cup of flour for cakes or muffins, and about 1 teaspoon per cup of flour for things like bread or pizza. So once you've learned about the ingredients you're using, when you try a recipe using a combination like this, it's much easier to make adjustments to improve your baking for next time. So if it needed more structure, you can add a little bit more of a grain flour. And if it was too dense, you can try increasing the amount of starch in the recipe. Another huge perk to baking this way is that my cupboards have never looked better. I can bake most bread and baked goods with 6 core ingredients. That's the 3 flours, 3 starches I mentioned. I store my flours in jars and just refill them as needed. It's also great because it's not brand specific. I can use whichever brand of tapioca starch is on sale or that I can grab at my local grocery store or bulk store. It really only takes an extra minute to mix the individual ingredients together, but if you're someone who likes the convenience of a mix, you can also just make your own. Like you can make 5 mixes at once. Here's a picture that Paul, who's one of my bakers in my courses, sent me via email, which I really liked. Extra points for the beautiful labels he put on his jars. So if you're looking for a resource where you can learn all about different gluten-free ingredients and techniques, be sure to check out my baking courses. I currently have 3 courses available: the Essentials course, the Holidays course, and the Bread course. And super top secret, I'm planning on releasing a new course in the late spring that will be the sibling to the Bread course. So that will be like shaped breads, flat breads, and quick breads, things like bagels, naan bread, and cinnamon rolls. So stay tuned for that. Each course includes in-depth sections about ingredients, techniques, and equipment, as well as step-by-step recipe videos that you can follow along with while you bake. Not only will you learn how to make your favorite staple foods gluten-free, but you'll also learn key information that will help you convert your own recipes to gluten-free as well. You'll get access to Robyn's gluten-free baking community, where you can ask questions and share your baking wins with other gluten-free bakers from all over the world. So if you're interested in signing up for a course or all 3, be sure to stop by my booth, which is number 204, because I have some sweet promotions going on just for this weekend at the Expo. So those are my tips on how to save money and bake better. Today we looked at the cost of being gluten-free, the challenges of all-purpose blends, mixes, blogs, and cookbooks, what's holding your baking back, and how to get started baking easy, affordable, and delicious gluten-free baked goods at home. Now, let me just bring this photo back up here one more time. Yep, there it is. Now, it sounds silly, but I can still remember the disappointment I felt when I took this photo. But if I had have known that in a couple years, I would instead be eating this, or this, or this, I think it would have made my switch to gluten-free a whole lot easier. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Robyn, for that really fun and entertaining presentation with a ton of facts and a ton of information. We also have the presentation recorded as well, so like later on you can go to our website, we can revisit it if you need those facts again. But we're opening up the floor for any questions specifically. If you guys, anyone have any questions for Robyn? If not, you can always visit her booth. I know most people are kind of shy. Anyone? Oh, we got one right here.
Hi, thanks for your presentation. I've been baking my own bread gluten-free for a number of years. My main problem is that my bread is not strong enough. It tends to fall apart when you make a sandwich out of it. Can you give a few tips around that?
Sure. Can I just ask you a follow-up question to that? So what are you using for a binder? Are you using xanthan gum? Are you using psyllium husk? Are you using eggs at all?
Both eggs and xanthan gum.
Okay. What kind of flours are you using for it?
My basic blend is 2 cups rice flour, 2/3 cup potato starch, 1/3 cup tapioca starch.
Interesting. I mean, I would have to see, like, it might just depend on, like, the liquid level and that kind of thing. a lot of those ingredients would actually work quite well. You could try increasing the amount of tapioca starch and reducing the potato. As I mentioned, tapioca starch has like really great elastic properties. That's actually like my main starch I use in my bread recipes. So increasing the amount of tapioca might help you out. And other than that, it might be xanthan gum as well if you just increase that amount a little bit as well.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you. Anyone else have any questions? Oh, right here.
Hi, I don't have a question. It's more of a comment. So I've been gluten-free for 53 years. I was diagnosed when I was 2 years old. I'm 55 now. I was one of the first people in Canada, it felt like, having celiac disease. It was really strange, and I lived in a northern community in BC, in Chetwynd, and it was really difficult for my mom to feed me. So I ate a lot of bananas and rice and potatoes. Finally, we came across a recipe, gluten-free cooking, and we learned, and we had to try to do things on our own because there was nothing like this fair. So this is like Disneyland for me. I'm so excited today. So one thing that happened to me also is I'm gluten-free and dairy-free and egg-free. So listening to this, I'm so excited to hear this, but I can't eat a lot of things that are made here with eggs or dairy. So what I've learned is to come up with a combination that works with other things too. So my primary recipe that I use for waffles is 2 cups of tapioca, 1 cup rice flour, and then I use mango, like about a half a cup of mango pureed, or apple, like apple sauce. And then I use that in addition to 1 cup of almond flour, or coconut flour even works, or chickpea flour for that 3rd cup. And it works quite well. So if anybody's vegan and gluten-free, that works, having fruit in there as well. And xanthan gum I've tried, and that works as well too. But I was just wanting to add that fruit element does work as well. So I just want to thank you again. This is so exciting to listen to you, and I really enjoyed your presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It sounds like you've you've really figured out how the ingredients work, especially because you had to do that. And that's a great tip about the fruit purees in place of eggs, especially if you're making things like waffles, cakes, muffins, that kind of thing. Like fruit purees are excellent.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that question. Anyone else? We're good. Well, thank you so much, Robyn, for that fun presentation.
Thank you, everyone.